So today on the podcast, we have my wife Sarah because we are talking about Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is her favorite, I guess. So,
Yes.
uh, to start things off, um, Sarah, I guess I already introduced you to our podcast audience, who's
You may know
should
me
know.
from down the rabbit trail.
Yeah. So, um, but outside of that, bring us up to speed a little bit on you with Lord of the Rings. Talk about Lord of the Rings a little bit, like how you got into it, why you love it so much, and just kind of talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, so I've always, like, growing up, I had things that I would have phases with. So, like, my earliest phase was Magic Treehouse. Then it was, like, Warrior Cats, then Harry Potter, and then it was Lord of the Rings. And that one has stuck. My family has been into Lord of the Rings since before I was born. I mean, the Return of the King, the movie, came out the year that I was born. And I don't remember the first time that I saw the movies because I have just always have seen them, which kind of sucks. I kind of wish that I could remember like the first time. But and then the first time I read the books, well, the first time I tried to read the books, I was like in middle school, and my little middle school brain got bored of it because they're very slow paced, which is not a bad thing, but to my middle school brain it was. I loved The Hobbit, and then in high school I came back to the Lord of the Rings books, loved them even more than the movies. I love the movies, but I also love the books a little bit more. And after that, I got into the Silmarillion. I started watching a lot of Lord of the Rings YouTubers like Nerd of the Rings. There's another one whose name I don't remember. Sorry, guy. Uh, and basically just made it my personal interest to know as much as I can about Lord of the Rings. I'll go ahead and say David probably knows more about the Silmarillion than I do. I'll give that to him because he's a little bit more intense than I am.
All right. Well, with that, David, here's the thing. I would say that I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, but I'm nowhere near the extent of y'all. So this is mostly going to be y'all's podcast. A little bit later, I have some trivia for y'all to do because y'all are so big into this. I want to see who is. I mean, you said that David might know more about the sim earlier. Let's just see who's more the bigger Lord of the Rings fan. But anyway, so David,
My biggest weakness is I'm bad at remembering their names because there are a
Yeah,
lot of them.
names
yeah.
are
So
the biggest thing I can't remember. But
Like you can describe what the story was, and like I know what story you're talking about, but you ask me who it's about, and I'm like, it's not very
mm,
Luthien. Or like,
So David, with Sarah telling her, you talk to me a little bit about you starting out with Lord of the Rings and why Lord of the Rings. Like, I know you like Marvel and you like Star Wars. We have those common interests. But why is Lord of the Rings for you something that is so like? Why are you so into Lord of the Rings? What draws you to that? And like, what? When was your first interaction with Lord of the Rings? Something like that.
um, so I probably the first time I actually read through the books, I actually listened to them on audiobook because I think I was in middle school as well. Um, but I actually did listen to through them. Well, I think I listened to Fellowship and most of the Two Towers before I watched the movies. So I did have the book background for most of it before I actually watched the movies. Because like I said, it was probably sometime in middle school when I actually got like really into it. But I feel like the thing that probably draws me into it a lot more so than some of the other stuff, and I guess this is also true with Star Wars too, but it's just the sheer amount of lore and stuff that is in this universe. Like it really is an entire history. Like there's so much
mm-hmm.
to this world, to Arda. There's so much to this world, and let me take that back and clarify something too. So a lot of people get this kind of a common misconception about Lord of the Rings. So generally, when you're talking about the like actual story of Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, it's not really incorrect to say Middle Earth because it all takes place in Middle Earth. But Middle Earth is a continent in the world of Arda. So that's
Mm-hmm.
Middle Earth's not the world; it's the continent that everything takes place on.
Yeah.
Or everything in
That's
the
something
Third
that
Age takes
she's
place on.
that's something that she's corrected me on. I will say that like I said, I'm not as big a Lord of the Rings scholar. I have gotten more into it with being married to her. I've watched a lot of Nerd of the Rings to kind of catch up, and just so I can have somewhat of a general conversation, generic conversation with like some of the history of Arda and stuff like that. But yeah, up until because I don't know how explicit it is in any of the movies. It probably is more so in the books. I'm not a big reader. My parents had me read or listen to the audiobooks before I watched the movies. I got through probably about as much as you did, David, before I was like, you know, I should be allowed to watch this anyways. And after a bunch of nagging, they caved in. So uh, I never actually got through the rest of them. But you know, that's more on me for not being a
Well,
reader.
and like I said, on that note, with the like naming of the regions and so the where stuff takes place, like I said, Middle Earth is not technically incorrect for if you're talking about really anything that happens in the Third Age, because most
Yeah.
stuff does take place in Middle Earth. So that's not
Yeah.
really incorrect, but it's just kind of that because that's the story everyone's familiar with in this universe is Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and because everything in those stories takes place in Middle Earth, that's just kind of where people think, okay, that's the name of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus Middle Earth. It sounds like it's
Yeah.
like Earth, but different.
It does sound like in that
Mm.
realm of thinking things. So
Mm. But
Um,
once you do dive into some of the like Silmarillion and stuff, like you do have a lot of events taking place in Aman and Beleriand, which are two other continents. Well, Beleriand and Middle Earth are kind of separate continents in the same way Europe and Asia are. But
Yeah. There's not really much of a reason for them to be divided except for the fact that they are.
yeah, they're divided by mountains, not ocean. But there is a distinction between the
Yeah.
two. But
now,
before we get too far into this, I do want to mention something because I was thinking about this too, and we are barely going to scratch the surface in this podcast of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Just because there's so much in this.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it today. I'm just like, maybe we should have done more, given each book its own podcast episode, and we might still do that in the future.
And then we can give like a month-long series to the Silmarillion.
I think maybe down the road we might want to do something similar to what we've done with the Star Wars movies. And I think we have a couple different series that we're planning on doing this with. I think we should add Lord of the Rings to it. Doing individual movie/book breakdowns, of this. Now that being said, I don't know how much, and this is all y'all's decision on what y'all decide to talk about. I have trivia, like I said, that could maybe gear some of the conversation a certain way. But for anyone who's unfamiliar or hasn't seen Lord of the Rings in a long time, we did just upload a video this past Friday on our YouTube channel, going over the three Lord of the Rings movies. So go check
it's
that
going
out
over the
if you need a
movies, not
refresher.
the books.
Yes.
If you haven't seen the movies in a long time, what's wrong with you? Because you should have seen them recently.
Now, to say the least, though, it is it's like a 20-ish 5-minute video somewhere in there. It's a short video that covers, 9+ hours of
12 if you talk
runtime.
about the extended edition.
Sarah, that's all that Sarah knows. So
Yeah.
in Sarah's mind, when I had her write this script, she wrote it off of 12 hours of information. So it's a lot of time crammed into a very small video. So the movies are the better way to go. But if you need a quick overarching refresher about any of it, watch that. And I found that when diving into Lord of the Rings, that Nerd of the Rings is a very good channel to watch. So if you need some maybe more background history on some of the stuff that David and Sarah are going to be talking about in this podcast, that would be a good place to go to kind of reference some things too.
Hello, Future Me. That's the other one. I just remembered.
Yes, he does a lot more like stuff about Tolkien more so than in universe. He does a lot of in-universe stuff too, but he does a lot about Tolkien and the philosophy behind Lord of the Rings. But yeah, he Nerd of the Rings does a lot more like stuff about the Legendarium itself. And kind of on a side note, but Hello Future Me, when I subscribed to him, he had, I think he had less than 1,000 subscribers, and he's like huge now. That blows my mind. I've mentioned this before on the
David's an
podcast.
OG.
I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but
Yeah.
that blows my mind that when I realized I'd been subscribed to him for that long. Because
It is cool to see how people grow on YouTube. Which, hey, subscribe to the channel if you're watching this or listening, because you can watch us grow or crash and burn, one of the two.
probably both
Kinda like
equally
Denethor.
entertaining.
Probably. So, what do y'all want to start off with? Okay, do you?
Well, I just have this on my mind because you mentioned the extended editions. I have very strong feelings about this. I think that the first time you watch the movies, you should watch the theatrical version because there are a couple twists that aren't as good in the theatrical version because they're like hinted at too soon or shown too soon and could have been shown at a better moment. One that comes to mind is Aragorn with the armies of the dead. If you're watching the theatrical edition, you don't know that they said yes until he's talking to the guys on the ships and he's like, this army, and then show up. And I think that's a little bit theatrically better of a moment
Well,
to have that twist in there. But for the most part, I prefer the extended editions. There are a couple scenes that I don't agree with. The main one being that the Witch King of Angmar like could have beaten Gandalf in a fight, which I disagree with.
and to your point, talking about the theatrical releases of the movies, there's a reason that they are the theatrical, because they're cut to fit, a movie better, or movie time better, pacing and stuff better. Because I will say at certain points during the extended edition, the pacing is off, just because it's just they added a bunch of deleted scenes back into the movie, which is where
And
that
Wesley
comes
noticed
from,
this too. I had never noticed it before, but the CGI in a couple of the extended editions isn't as polished as it is in the theatrical
Now,
cut.
if we want to talk about the CGI in those movies, the CGI, at least in the scenes or everything in the theatrical release of the movie, the CGI still holds up because it was all, it's mostly practical, but with CGI, added in. I think the only thing is that are purely
the CGI is more like.
Yeah, the only things that are
Sorry.
the only things that are purely really CGI that I think hold up really well are the Balrog in Moria and Gollum.
The CGI in most cases is more like a polish on top than the foundations, which I think is part of the reason it holds up very well.
One thing I think is amazing is the Battle of Helm's Deep was purely practical effects, even down to the rain and all of
it's amazing.
Army, the explosion, all the armies, they're all practical effects. There's no all the orcs are extras, all the Rohirrim soldiers are extras. There's no CGI that blows my mind, and that's why it looks so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you want to for a conversation. I don't know if you want to stick with the movies or the book, the main Lord of the Rings storyline for now, just because I know there's so much else to the Legendarium, and not many people probably know about that. But if you want to talk about something else from the Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales or any of the books of Middle Earth history, I'd be able to talk about that. Also, on a side note,
then we'd be here all day.
Yes, we would. Also, on a side note, for people who don't know just how much there is to this, in addition to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, you can see it back there. There's a shelf right there, and all
with your
the
prancing
books.
pony.
Well,
Or no,
underneath,
it's not prancing
underneath
pony.
it,
That's Rohan.
Yeah, underneath all of that, like right there on that shelf, all those books are from the Legendarium. There's like I've got like a dozen books that aren't Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit that are, part of that universe. And there are more. I do not have them all, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, I will say it was interesting. I looked into Tolkien a little bit more, and if you look at his works, he did Lord of the Rings. Like, there's not like he's some
Other than that, he has like an English book
yeah,
that
he has full like education books, but he's strictly dedicated to Lord of the Rings when it comes to writing, and like there is a lot that like the world is so fleshed out is because he took so much time with it, and there's so much to it. There's so much he released in his lifetime. There's so much finished things that were released after his lifetime, and like there is a lot of books, a lot of tales. I mean, Arda has a full history, like you
yeah, I mean,
on this, but it has a full length history of like thousands of years.
the way that I describe the Silmarillion people is like one of the reasons it's such like a tough pill to swallow, I guess. Get through it is that it's basically just a history book, more or less. Like it's like all of this like, the years crushed into one book.
Hey, real quick, go ahead and or check your internet because you're kind of cutting in and out.
I don't think this is gonna be much better, but I can hope.
You're not cutting out or you're not cutting out like you were.
All right, we'll see how it works.
All right. Sarah, what was the last thing you were talking about?
I was saying one of the ways I like describe the Silmarillion to people is that it's kind of like a history textbook, which is one of the reasons it's like such a tough pill to swallow, so to speak, like to get through it. It's just like thousands and thousands of years all squished together.
And you can't really just sit down and read the Silmarillion. Like
No.
it's not that kind of book. It's not a novel, like you're saying. It's really organized more like a textbook.
You don't read the Silmarillion, you study it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stories, like, and most of them you can get through in a single sitting. Like, they're very, most of them are very short, but there's some longer ones. Like the first third, it might be even close to a half of the Silmarillion is just about Melkor and the fall of Melkor, rise of Morgoth. Um, but yeah, there's a lot to that. There's also a lot to uh, Unfinished Tales is very similar too because it's a lot more shorter stories, but it's basically the same thing. It's just a collection of stories throughout the history of Arda.
Yeah.
And
Now, speaking, since we are talking about things from Cimmerillion and like older Arda, talk to me about you because I know both of y'all have pretty strong opinions about the Amazon original TV show Rings of Power. And I, even as not as big of a Lord of the Rings fan as y'all, I have problems with it.
okay, so
But talk to me a little. Y'all kind of go a little back and forth and talk about that.
So, season 2 is supposed to come out next year, and I do want to do a dedicated episode to season 1 before that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll sum up my basic thoughts here. So essentially, I will say I did enjoy it. It was. I thought it was good for what it was. I didn't like a lot of the lore changes they did. I think the way they did like revealing Sauron was kind of dumb, changing it from the original text, and the way they like So, okay, in the original story in the Legendarium, uh, Celebrimbor and Sauron, which he didn't know Sauron was Sauron at the time. Sauron had taken the form of Anatar, which was an elf, and had deceived Celebrimbor. But in the books, Sauron and Celebrimbor had forged the 16 rings, so the 9 and the 7. Not 9 rings for men and the 7 rings for dwarves, before Sauron had forged the 1 or Celebrimbor had forged the 3. Because Celebrimbor forged the 3 by himself. And that
Yeah.
they changed that in Rings of Power because they changed it so the 3 were the first rings that they had forged. And I don't know how they're going to fix that and actually introduce the other Rings of Power in the show. I don't. That was the that in the series in the season finale was the biggest thing that bothered me, at least lore wise. And I don't know how they're going to fix that in season 2. But yeah, another thing like lore wise at least that bothered me about season 1 of Rings of Power was the so arguably for me at least the best part of that show was uh all the whole story arc inside of Khazad-dûm.
Yes.
I really liked Durin as a character, and um, I will say it is a little weird having seeing a female dwarf, but just because we've never seen that in movies or anything. But Durin and Disa, I really like those characters, and I think that was a good arc. But I do think it's a little weird how they're moving around the timeline because this is supposed to take place in the Second Age, and it seems like they're setting up the destruction of fall of Khazad-dûm, and that didn't happen until the Third Age, until after
Yeah.
the ring was cut from Sauron's hand. So I don't know if they will do all that and they will go through all that, but because I know that the story they're trying to tell in the books was over such a long period of time. They're condensing it down to just a couple of years, even though in reality it was thousands of years of history that they're condensing down. In fact, they make a joke in the show like once they forge the rings, like I think it's something along the lines of but basically they've done like 1,000 years work in 8 days or something, making a joke at the fact that they condensed the timeline. But like I said, there are a lot of problems I have with it, and I'm just wondering how they're going to fix some of these, if they even are, and correct what they've done and get back on course with the actual lore. I don't know what they're going to do with that. I've talked for a long time, so I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with it, to be honest. I thought it was an okay show to watch. I mean, like, it's definitely not if even outside of being a Lord of the Rings fan, it's not something I would rewatch. I thought it was kind of bland and basic at best in the storylines that it came up with, and the storylines that it was trying to retell, it didn't do them justice. Some of my biggest problems were the whole story with the lady and the elf falling in love. Should have never happened in the first place, for one thing, and for another thing, it was extremely boring. Every time they were on screen, I kind of didn't care about what was happening. Um, the hobbits being there, again, every time the hobbits were there, I was kind of just like, eh. Again, like, the everything that happened in Khazad-dûm was the best stuff that happened. Like,
That was the most entertaining
yeah,
aspect.
that was the only part of the show where I was like actually immersed and like focused on what the story was telling, not just really picking it apart because I was bored. I hated the way that Galadriel was portrayed. I thought she was incredibly unlikable, and it's frankly amazing to me that you can take a character like Galadriel and somehow rewrite her in the way that they did. And
Mm.
I've heard a lot of people say, like, oh, well, she was younger. Of course, she's like more arrogant and pig-headed. And it's like, relatively, sure, she was younger, but she's also an elf and she's been alive at this point for like how many thousands of years? Like, it's not like she's like a teenager and later she's an adult. This is like
And
comparing like a 30-year-old and like a 50-year-old. Like, yeah, younger, but like, it's not like she's 12.
and that's another thing too. A lot of people, or a lot. I don't think a lot of people realize that Galadriel was also like, during the time of Lord of the Rings, she was like one of the oldest elves still in Middle Earth, and she was still like,
Yeah, she's one of the only people left from the first age.
and she was still, even during this time or in Second Age, she still would have been considered a very like wise, high-ranking elf, you know. And yeah, she is portrayed as being very, very immature. Like I kind of like the fact that they changed her to be more active in the story instead of just being like the kind of more the like background character, voice of wisdom. But I do agree they made her way too immature for where she was supposed to be at that time. Um,
Yeah.
and Elrond to a degree too, even though Elrond was much younger than Galadriel, which and that's another thing too. If anything, if you're going to make one of those two characters the more immature one, it should have been Elrond because he was much younger because he was born during the first age, I think.
I think so. Yeah,
Because
because shoot, what's his dad's name? I know it.
Neither one of y'all are good with names.
No.
This is not good.
Well, all their names sound the same.
but okay, but I know
Nerd of the Rings.
Elrond and
It was hard keeping up.
but Elrond and Elros were born during the first age, and because Elros also became the first king of Numenor. Um,
Yeah.
but so they were much younger. So yeah, like I said, if you were going to pick one of those two characters to be the more immature one, it should have been Elrond, even though at this point he was still at least like 1,500 to 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
I also
Um,
found it a little weird. I also found it a little weird, like you mentioned the elf and the human love story that they were trying to tell. It also is a little weird the love story that they're trying, or the chemistry that they're trying to put, and maybe a little bit of a love story they're trying to push between who you found out later on was Sauron and Galadriel. Like
Yeah.
that
I
was a
thought that
little.
was eh.
That was. I mean, that wasn't really like Sarah said. There wasn't, at least from my watching of it, not much entertainment outside of what happened with Elrond. But like that side of things, it was a little weird. Like when you think about it,
I
even before the reveal that
mm,
he was Sauron, it was a little weird. Like there
well,
doesn't need to be this kind of a thing going on.
like I said, I didn't
I
like
think
the
one
way
of
they
the
did
main
Sauron at all. That's in season one.
yeah. I think one of the main problems with Galadriel is that she's incredibly unlikable, but it's not supposed to be a character flaw either. Like it's not like they were like, "Oh, well, we'll make her unlikable and she'll work through it and become a better person." They were like, "Oh, we'll make her Miss Girl Boss and she's like kicking everybody's butt." But actually they just made her incredibly arrogant and like took all of the worst parts of being like a male superhero or hero and like put that on her and none of the good parts. So like she's just annoying. And the actual Galadriel is incredibly powerful and incredibly wise and like
Not arrogant.
no, and she's such a good character when you look at her entire lifespan and everything that has like brought her to that moment. And then it's just like it just feels like a slap in the face. And I think that's part of the reason why the forced chemistry between her and Sauron feels extremely forced because you're kind of like, this lady's super unlikable. Why would Sauron even like her? Like, nobody likes her.
But yeah, it's like I said,
That's another thing.
go ahead.
I was gonna say was with it like um, you can tell when you're watching it that they are trying to hit all those story beats. Like it doesn't seem like a fluid story. It seems like they're taking a bunch of story tropes and just shoving it in there and saying, what characters can we have with this thing here? Oh, we're just gonna put this here. And I feel like in a lot of ways, like they do disregard the lore for that. Like I said, I'm not as big into Lord of the Rings into Lord of the Rings as y'all are, but like I know enough about Lord of the Rings to know that there's a bunch of problems with how they went about doing some of these things that I even was like, nah, this doesn't work. And it just feels like they're trying to hit those story beats even when it doesn't fit. So it all feels forced.
Also, the
Yeah.
fact that the stranger, the comet guy,
Mm.
Not Gandalf.
I was about to say that's why I didn't say that, because it seems like they were strongly hinting in that last episode that he was Gandalf, and
Yeah.
Was
I would not be surprised
wasn't
at
there?
all. I would not be surprised at all if they reveal that he is Gandalf in season 2. Even though I also have a problem with that, because Gandalf, Saruman, and Radagast did not get to Middle Earth until the Third Age.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
isn't there also a theory circulating that it could be the Blue Wizards, even though they were like there's something wrong? Y'all would know more about this than I do, but I've heard that theory is easy to debunk too, with
So
like the time frame and like where they are.
no, if they're going to actually, which he's obviously in a story. That's obviously what they want him to be in the show. And
Mhm.
the only candidate that he could be is one of the Blue Wizards, because the time frame does line up, and there's not really a whole lot we know about Alatar or Palando, so him being one of them is not that far fetched, but still it's you know the whole thing of them
I would
trying to
be fine.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying the whole thing of them trying to force it being Gandalf, just kind of, like I said, Gandalf wasn't introduced or doesn't show up in Middle Earth until the Third Age.
Yeah, I would be fine with it being one of the Blue Wizards. I just doubt that they're gonna do that. I mean, like, they know that, like, this is gonna sound like I'm throwing shade, but like the casual people who know of Lord of the Rings, like, are gonna be like, "Oh, Gandalf, hobbits, cool, I'll watch it." Not like if you don't look into the actual lore, then sure, you're like, "Okay, Gandalf is here, cool," but like, still the fact that he should not be there.
So when it comes to Lord of the Rings, like where where do you find the Blue Wizards? Or like where is that introduced? Where do you find that? Because obviously I know it's not in any of the movies that at least stands out to me. Because that would be what like like you said, it's for the nostalgia, it's for the recognition.
And Gandalf mentions them once in The Hobbit,
Okay.
but
So but like where do you find them more fleshed out in Lord of the Rings?
Well, as I said before, they don't really get fleshed out much.
Okay.
they're basically just mentioned.
They're mentioned in
Bunch of
Unfinished
like
Tales. I
Easter
think they might be mentioned in the Silmarillion. I don't know for sure, because the Silmarillion generally deals with the time of the Two Trees and the First Age. So I don't remember that I got into the Second Age that much, but it might have, and I might have mentioned them. But I know it's or as I think it's unfinished yet. I've read so much in so many different books that I can't remember what's in what book. You probably have the same
Yeah.
problem. Um, but yeah,
and I need you to be a living encyclopedia for Lord of the Rings.
but
You're failing me.
I'm pretty sure they were in Unfinished Tales, where most of what we're what we know about them comes from. But again, we don't, because there's another thing too. Tolkien himself didn't actually know for sure what happened to them, what their story was, because he wrote about them originally, and he had different names for them. Then he rewrote about them as Altar and Palando. And originally Alatar and Palando were supposed to have abandoned their mission and gone off and formed cults or whatever out in the south of the world or the east of the world. But then later on, Tolkien writes about them saying that it's entirely possible that they may have stayed true and they were fighting against the cults of Morgoth in the far east and far south. So it just we we don't.
I love it when like a writer or someone who's like making a movie, whatever it is, a creator or something, is asked a question about a character that maybe they've made in passing or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. I don't care. You come up with whatever you want for it. Might have a little, but it's like, like you said, he doesn't necessarily even know what his thoughts on it were. And it's like, so you can speculate all you want, but it doesn't really matter because there's no technically canon answer for it if the author himself didn't have a canon answer for it, which is kind of funny,
But do you have anything? Do either of you have anything else to say about Rings of Power?
Well, I was gonna say with the thought of like how they do just hit those story beats, that it is pretty like not even just aside from the fact that like Gandalf is a recognizable character in Lord of the Rings, and a prominent character in Lord of the Rings, which is why that figure is probably going to end up being Gandalf. It also is so. I think everyone pretty well could call the fact that the what's his name or whatever was going to end up being Sauron at the end of it all.
Yeah.
It was very obvious. I feel like them hitting those story beats, this is just another one of those story beats where it's just kind of like, oh, we're going to have a big twist, but it's not really that big because everyone can see it coming.
I'll say, if you know the lore, it was like blindingly obvious. Even if you don't know the lore, it's still like, but he's Sauron, right? Like, because why else is he here?
Yeah.
And when I was watching it, I didn't really. I did see the signs, but I didn't really. I guess I didn't really want to acknowledge that because I'm just like, okay, maybe I'm just imagining this. Maybe they're actually going to do it the right way, but
You had too much faith in them.
Yeah.
I got a cat.
Which, speaking on that note, as soon as this project was announced and that Peter Jackson was not going to be involved, I had so much. I was very scared for this project, and I guess I was right on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
like I said,
the good things I'll say about the show. Sorry.
Like I said, it's just the first season. It could improve, but if it keeps going like it is, I don't know. I don't know.
The seemingly lack of respect they have for the lore is going to probably continue, which will enrage y'all and basically anyone who's more than just a casual viewer of it. Which, like Sarah said, I don't even see it as that interesting from a casual standpoint. Like, it's a very intriguing story. Like, it is, but it also isn't. Like, it's not. I didn't think it was told well.
The best thing about the show really is just the effects. The effects are good. The music's pretty good. It's not Howard Shore, but it's pretty good. Other than that, it's just like, okay, I'm not like upset that I watched it, but I'm definitely not gonna watch it again.
Now, if y'all are, I don't want to cut y'all off. Y'all are still have something to add to.
You're good.
Rings of Power, okay. But talking about kind of staying on the same note of something not really being well received, but also bringing back Peter Jackson. What did y'all think about the Hobbit movies? I
like Martin Freeman.
Oh, no. I will say casting in those movies, perfect. I would not change that. But the story, some of the changes they made, I don't. some of the changes they made, I don't know if they were necessarily for the best.
Well, they also drug. The Hobbit's a book, right? A single book. It's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
big book, but it's
And
a
it's
single
the
book.
shortest book.
But they drug that into 3 movies, which was not necessary and is kind of obvious. Like, okay, you can get away with the 2 movies that they did, but the fact that it didn't wrap up after 2 movies was like, okay, now you can really see how they're just dragging it. Like the what was it? The Battle of the Five Armies, wasn't that the last one?
Mm-hmm.
Am I
Yeah.
thinking right?
Yeah.
I have not seen these in a long time, but like just kind of thinking back on it, it seems like I think I remember it being like really just a lot of drawn out stuff, specifically in that one. But like, it's a very drawn out series. I love Martin Freeman. I think he does a great job in most anything that he does. Um, but
I loved him as Bilbo.
he did a
Mm-hmm.
great job as Bilbo. But and I think there were aspects. I know y'all don't like a lot of the CGI that was used for the orcs. I haven't seen it recently enough to really think about it that well, but I think aspects of it were done pretty good because it had more technology, and maybe aspects were abused as well. But
Um, Speaking of good technology, Smog looked great.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the orcs were bad. The goblins were horrendous, to be honest. Like, especially looking in comparison to the goblins in the Lord of the Rings movies, it's like obscene how terrible they look. All in all, I enjoyed them more so than Rings of Power. I think they told a better cohesive story. It is extremely slow because it should not have been 3 movies. But, I thought that the way that they mirrored dragon sickness with how the ring affects people was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought that Thorin's like fall into slight insanity over the dragon sickness was like shown very well. Um, the whole thing with Keely and what's her face?
love triangle is that just a love?
It was sort of a
Tario.
love triangle because they tried to put Legolas in it too,
Mm-hmm.
but
So okay,
it
so
I think the movies would have been fine without it, but I'm not like mad about it, I guess.
so it should have been 2 movies. In fact, that was actually what Peter Jackson's original pitch was for 2, not a trilogy.
Yeah,
The studio wanted to milk it for more money, obviously. Um,
As they do.
of course.
but yeah, I think so. I think it should have been 2 movies. It should have been from the beginning of the book to Mirkwood. I think it should have ended when the elves capture the dwarves, and have that as kind of like a cliffhanger kind of a thing. Because obviously, if you've read the book, you know what's going to happen. But if this is your first introduction to this story, have that as kind of a cliffhanger. Then pick up there in the second movie. Go through. You'll introduce Lake Town very early on, so you'll get Bard introduced very early on in the second movie. So he'll have more character, but also the fact of focusing so much on these side characters, like the whole thing with what's his face, the Master of Lake Town's assistant guy,
Yeah, that
and
was kind of weird.
Tariel, and all these characters they made
That's
up.
funny.
Why do they focus so much on these characters? And even to a point, well, and I think it was cool to see Legolas, but he didn't add anything to the story.
No, he did not need to be there at all.
I,
He had some cool fight scenes.
I think it would have been cool to
That's
see.
it.
I think it still would have been cool to see him, but not to the degree we did. But I don't know why they added so much character development to all of these characters when the characters that from the actual book, the main characters, all the dwarves, were very lacking in character development.
Yeah.
All of the
Also, this is sorry, go ahead.
all the dwarves, with the exception of Thorin, Fili, and Keely, are the exact same. Like
Yeah.
if you showed
all-
me if you showed me a picture of the whole cast, I couldn't I know all the dwarves' names, but I could not tell you which one was which. just because they're
Yeah,
all the same.
except for Bomber because he's fat.
Yeah.
All the ones that I know are Thor and Feely and Keely. Those are the only like three ones that stick out in my mind as far as the dwarves go. Like
Mm.
I don't know their names. I don't know all their names. Those are the three that I know.
One thing that really bothers me about the Hobbit movies is at the end when Legolas is talking to his dad and he mentions Aragorn. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Aragorn would have been, I might have my years off, but at the very least like 5 years old, if not born yet, right?
No, okay, so it does work because, well, hold up, wait a minute. Okay, no, if
Because
you're go,
wasn't it
okay,
like
okay,
70 years beforehand?
if you're going off
And
of
he
the movie timeline,
tower.
if you're going off the movie
That's true.
timeline, it works because the movie timeline. Okay, so between the books, there's 60 years. So I'm assuming that's going to be the same, 60 years.
Yeah.
Now, in the beginning of the Fellowship, that's Frodo's 33rd birthday, and he leaves almost
Yeah.
immediately. Aragorn
See,
is
that
like
makes more sense. I hadn't really thought about that.
Aragorn is like 80 in the Lord of the Rings. I know he seems old, I know that seems old for him, but he has Numenorian blood, so that makes him live longer. Numenorians lived almost 200 years, so that's why it seems like he's in the prime of his life because he is. So it's more comparable to like a 40-year-old.
Yeah.
Basically, with Numenorians, just like half their age, and that's about where you could put them in like their aging. Well, I guess they would reach maturity at the same like 18 years old, but still, if you want to do that. But anyway, um, so if you look at the movie timeline, he would have been probably like 18 to 20. But in the book timeline, it doesn't really make sense because there's an extra 20 years in there between the
Yeah.
birthday party when Bilbo leaves to go to Rivendell and when Frodo leaves to go on his venture because the book mentions that Frodo's 51 when he leaves, even though the birthday party in the beginning
Yeah.
of the book he was 33, because he remarks on that because Bilbo was 51, and that's actually how we know it's 60 years because he's 11D1 in the beginning. So, like I said, there's an extra 80 years, or there's an extra 20 years in the book gap. So that's probably what you're thinking of. So yes, if it was set to the actual book timeline, Aragorn would not have been born yet. But since they condensed all that time, took out that 20-year gap, Aragorn
Yeah.
would have been
That makes more
around
sense.
20. But
Fair enough.
yeah, like I said, there are problems I have with the Hobbit movies, but it's not as bad as Rings of Power by no means. Um,
Yeah.
I still like watching the Hobbit movies. Um, I actually have the extended editions, which I have not watched yet.
I haven't seen them either.
I'm more okay. So the first two are only like 5 minutes longer, so they're not really extended. The Battle of the Five Armies is got like an extra 15 to 20 minutes, I think. And it's R-rated, so I don't know what they added in, but
Oh wow.
yeah. I've seen some of the deleted scenes and a lot of them are battle stuff. So that's probably what gave it the R
Not
rating.
to bring up Rings of Power again, uh, but do you remember when the movie or when the show was being worked on and there was like some article about how there was going to be an intimacy coordinator and everybody was freaking out because they thought there was going to be nudity?
Mhm.
I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember that ever coming up in the show at all. I blocked a lot of it out, so it's possible I just missed something,
There
but
was no nudity,
you would have remembered.
No, there's because
but I don't remember there being
well,
any.
because I was worried they were going to do what they did with Game of Thrones
See, yeah, that's why everybody was freaking out about it.
because
Which I would argue they kind of did Game of Thrones it just without the nudity.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Wonder it's no good.
yeah,
I was waiting for
I
that.
do
I had to
actually.
say something.
I do. I have not read A Song of Ice and Fire. I do kind of want to read through those books, but I really don't have any interest in the show.
I know generally the storyline, but I haven't read or watched them. I've just been
Mm,
told that I need to.
yeah, I know it's got a lot of. I know it's very like even the books are very dark. There's a lot of killing. Uh, I know the main character in the first book dies like halfway through, but other than that, I don't
I do with
really
the main
know.
characters.
Yeah, other
Kill
than that,
your
I don't really know.
darlings.
But I guess since we're talking about Lord of the Rings projects and film, really the only thing we have left to talk about is the actual Lord of the Rings movies themselves.
I was gonna say we probably should move on to those.
Mm. Because that's the most recognizable. Like we've talked a lot about lore, a lot about all the other stuff, but that's the most recognizable thing to most people. That's what most people are going to know. So we probably should talk about that because we've been talking for almost an hour, and we haven't
Yeah.
really gotten to that yet. Um. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies?
Personally, I love them. I know a lot of there's a lot of Lord of the Rings purists that's like, if Tolkien didn't write it, it doesn't exist. I respect that, and I consider the books and the movies to be separate works of art, but they're both amazing. I love the movies, like I said, I grew up on them. I think that Peter Jackson portrays it very well. All of the imagery in the movies is amazing. Like I said, Howard Shore is amazing. He
Mm.
stays in my playlist forever. Um, the effects and stuff are all good, and it's it's just a good series. Like I'm I wrote the script for the recap, and one of the lines I did was like, one does not simply watch one of the movies and not watch the others. And for me, that's true. I cannot watch one like Marvel. I can watch one Marvel movie and I don't care about the others. Like as I'll watch them sometime, but like Lord of the Rings, if I watch one within 2 days, I have seen all of them
Mm.
minimum.
And to
That's why I
that
try not to get her started on them.
to that point, that's why I'm always like, because I love every minute of watching those movies, even how with how many times I've seen them. But I try not to watch them that often. For one reason, I think I enjoy them more when I haven't seen them in a while. But and then I
Yeah.
also just the time they take because it is a time commitment to watch those
I
movies.
think you
12
and me,
hours.
I think you and me spent a whole day one time watching them.
And
Like,
we didn't even get through all of them.
yeah, it's true. I
We
think,
got to like the end of Return of the King Part 1.
yeah, because when you're watching the extended editions, which is all she accepts. And I
Well,
think it
that's
was
all
the
we
first.
have anyway.
I think it was the first time that I was watching them too. But the extended edition. But she was like, "Oh, we have to watch this. This is all I ever watched. Let's watch Lord of the Rings." We got through, the two movies, and it was. I mean, we started in the not early morning. It was mid morning, and we had to finish the next movie the next day. But it does take a long time to watch them. They're good, even from someone like me who I don't have as long of attention span to sit down and watch 12 hours worth of movies. I don't have the time. Sometimes I don't even care enough to, but they're good movies. They did a really good job with them.
And and
You know,
and like I said, I'll admit I did not do my due diligence before this podcast. I wanted to watch them all, but I did not have the time.
I didn't even plan on watching any of it. I did say that I was going to listen to the audiobooks at work because I have a lot of time to listen at work. And then I forgot about it and thought about it Saturday. And by then I didn't have enough time.
Mm.
I've been listening to the audiobooks recently anyway. So I'm partway through Fellowship of the Ring, but I didn't want to like rush through it just for
Yeah,
this. Because I mean,
I
like I've
understand
seen
that.
them enough times. I might have watched a YouTube video like to refresh, but like I don't need to sit down for 12 hours. I'd love to, but I don't have time.
I did watch some Nerd of the Rings this afternoon, so I consider that my homework. But
Yeah,
like,
I
same.
did honestly the least amount of research
Well, you're just
for
here as a formality.
for this video because I wanted the conversation to be mostly y'all talking. And for the how in depth it would get if y'all were talking, and how much more like there would be content wise for y'all to be discussing this. I think
Mm.
that it wouldn't have been bad had because I would have done more research if me and David were strictly doing this podcast with me and him talking about Lord of the Rings. But I do think it's a better thing for y'all to have the conversation, y'all to talk about what your likes and dislikes are.
Mm.
Um, but
But yeah, ultimately, I do agree with you on the movies because, like, yes, they changed a few things, not nearly what they did with the Hobbit. They changed a few
Yeah.
things here and there, but ultimately, they're still amazing movies. They really are. Like
I think that sorry, go ahead.
and like you said, I do have to view them separately sometimes, just because it's you know the lore, especially when you bring in the Hobbit too, because the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Rings movies are connected, and the so I have to not I have to treat them separately in my mind most of the time, but still, the Lord of the Rings movies are still amazing movies.
In my opinion, the Lord of the Rings movies are the best book to film adaptation of all time. I
with
Oh,
don't
for
think that
sure.
that there's ever going to be something better because at this point, all like 90% of movies that come out of Hollywood are just cash grabs anyway. I don't think anybody's ever going to put the care and time into those movies that Peter Jackson and the rest of the cast and the rest of everybody else who worked on it, Howard Shore, all of them.
Oh, and
They like basically moved to New Zealand for a couple years just to work on these movies. Like
you talk
I just don't think
about
anybody's ever going to put that much care into it again.
the cast too. Casting for that movie was outstanding. Like all, and I think part of it is because they're not like movie stars like a lot of people in Hollywood are today. They're actual actors
Yeah.
who can actually know how to act. Like I think everyone in this movie portrayed their character astonishingly well. Like it was very good.
with uh, comments on what Sarah was saying about how like the book to movie adaptation and how like that's something that close and well done is never going to be done again. You do think with stuff like that, and probably why they took so many liberties in the Rings of Power is because Hollywood nowadays is all about they don't want you to know what's going on. Like I know we've talked about this before, but like certain things when it comes to Star Wars, because there's so much lore that people want to see either in video games or in movies, they're not gonna they're more than likely not gonna do because of the element of surprise that they want to have for you. As viewers and as fans of these, different um what's the word I'm looking for?
Franchise.
Franchises. Honestly, sometimes we don't care for the surprise. We just want the content. Like I think we talked about before about how you and me would kind of like to see a Darth Revan adaptation, but like there's so much known about him, and that would be what we want to see, despite the fact that they want to pull some twists. They didn't
And
do that with this Lord of the Rings. They told the story as it was, more or less. The outcome you already knew if you read the books, and they didn't veer off from that, and it was a success. And sometimes fans just want that.
I have the perfect example for to sum up what you're talking about here. So a lot of filmmakers now are trying to add their own story into pre-existing IP, and to a point, I can understand that. They want to try to make something their own, want to try to do something that has not been done before. But when you're dealing with pre-existing IP, you do have to be very careful because fans of it are fans of it for a reason. And if
Yeah.
you
Fans will make a break.
and especially if you're dealing with let's say an adaptation, like a film adaptation of books that already exist. The story already
Mhm.
exists. The story's already been told. Especially
Yeah.
then, you have to
You
be
can
very careful. And the example I was thinking of was, so Ryan Johnson, he directed The Last Jedi,
Mhm.
and from what I understand, he really likes like filmmaking that like catches you off guard, that hasn't been done before. He also directed Knives Out.
Hmm.
That's a perfect example of taking, it's the same principle, but it's an original movie and a pre-existing IP. It works with the original movie because no one's expecting anything from it. But when you have a story that has, pre-existing IP, that has all this lore behind it, that has all of this, like in even there's even a ton of lore that takes place after Return of the Jedi that are now considered legends. There's all of this stuff here, and to do this and to completely throw it on its head, to completely change what Star Wars is about, is what makes that movie not work. And I feel like that's one thing that a lot of filmmakers try to do, even though it does not work with pre-existing IP.
Yeah.
you can retell a story and make it compelling and interesting and a joy to watch and not change anything
Mm-hmm.
other than like pacing for a movie, because pacing for a book and pacing for a movie are going to be different. And you can't put like 2 days worth of reading into 2 hours and include every single detail. That's why Tom Bombadil isn't there. We miss him, but we understand.
Mm-hmm. I.e., that's why Lord of the Rings is the best movie adaptation of a novel.
Yes.
Um, Now, I do want to make a quick comment since we are talking a little bit about the movie industry. Um, I saw an interesting clip the other day. I think it was Matt Damon, and he was on Hot Ones. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, yeah.
The Hot Wing show. He was on that, and so the question was asked because Matt Damon's been in the movie industry for such a long time. He's been a part of acting in movies as well as producing movies for a very long time. And so the question was asked, like, how he's viewed the changes in the movie industry and like what some of those changes are and like different things like that. So he said one thing that's really changed when it comes to movies nowadays is how if basically the essence of what he was saying was that if a movie does not do well in theaters, a movie doesn't do well. Like they don't have DVDs to fall back on. Like it used to be, they said it used to be whenever a movie would come out, they'd get revenue off of the movie when it came out in theaters, and then they would get revenue off of the DVD. So it'd be like two paydays basically. And he said nowadays you don't get that anymore because everything goes to streaming. It's a little bit different. You don't have that DVD release that's as big of a deal. And so with that in mind, and one reason why like you're not going to see things like this nowadays is because and the reason that you're seeing people go into things like original existing IPs and continuing franchises that have been successful in the past is because everything that comes out in theaters nowadays has to be a hit, otherwise it fails. Like he said, well, his example was nowadays you don't see rom-coms in movie theaters much anymore. Why? Because those aren't going to really do as well in movie theaters in most people's eyes. But what is? Okay, Marvel is going to do well. Superheroes are going to do well. Star Wars is going to do well. Stuff like that. Those are like solid go-tos. And so it's like we're going to see with the um, rise in streaming and services like that and the doing away with like DVDs, we probably are going to see less original ideas and less in some ways good movies too, because people are going to be scared of taking risks because when they're getting a couple $100 million from a movie studio and they're expected to make a couple $100 million on top of that as a revenue, they have to make a movie that is so good that everyone wants to go see it in the movie theaters. They don't want to break even, they want to make more, which they can't do unless they do it in the movie theaters, which is kind of telling of the movie industry and kind of makes sense as to why, we are where we are with movies.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said, I it really does boil down to economics with a lot of this stuff because, like you said, it's all about the studio making money, and
Mm-hmm.
not just making back money. They want to make money,
Yeah,
and that's actually one thing that's
which is
kind
a
of
big reason.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was about to say that's actually kind of so there's a term that's kind of known in the industry. It's called Hollywood accounting, and
Mm-hmm.
this is basically a way that studios screw over actors and cast members. So basically, a lot of times in contracts they'll promise um, a percentage of net profit, but the way they spend it on the books is that there is no net profit, and in fact, the movie lost money. When in fact, the gross amount of money that the movie made is way more than the amount of money the studio actually spent on the project. And so, there's obviously big business. There's always going to be some kind of shady thing going on, but that's just the way that.
There's a reason. There's a reason. There's a writers and actors strike going on right now.
Mm,
So
yeah,
getting their comeuppance.
yeah.
But what I was gonna say before though was and I had it and I lost it. Uh, uh oh, that's what it was. Going back to Lord of the Rings, which so that's another reason why, and I know obviously like Rings of Power is not gonna come out in theaters, it's released on streaming. But I feel like that's another reason why um that's not going to end up being, for at least, fans of Lord of the Rings, not going to be something that's seen as good because of the fact that it all is essentially a cash grab. They're using existing IP to make something, and do they really care if it's good or not? I don't think so, which is why I don't think they're going to take the time to really look into the lore and figure out, how everything should fit together. Like you're saying, there's certain things that you'd like to see fixed in season two. I doubt that those things are going to be fixed because I don't think that they care enough because it is all about the money
Mm.
with that.
And
And if they make something that's maybe a little controversial, they might get more traffic on it. The more publicity you get, if, even if it is somewhat of a bland story, if you're getting a lot of publicity, you're probably going to be making a lot of money off of it, probably still getting views. So,
now on that note, that is kind of confusing to me because I'm going to compare Rings of Power to another Amazon show on kind of applying the same logic you're applying here to it. So
mm,
I know you have not watched it yet, but the Amazon series Invincible is based off of comics,
yeah.
and I haven't read the comics. I would like to, but I'm a fan of the show, and I don't really want. I kind of want like season 2 is coming out soon. I kind of want to see what the show is gonna do more so than the get spoiled plot lines from the comics. But anyway, season 1 of the
Yeah.
show followed the comic books almost to a T. They did
Mm,
change some stuff. They did change some of the like the way characters act and stuff, but the general plot, general storyline is like almost the exact same. And in fact, some of the scenes and stuff, because it's a comic book animation style. So the series, the way the series is animated, and the way the comic books are drawn, they look identical. And
yeah.
some of the fight scenes and stuff in the show are literally taken straight from the comic book pages. Like it's that similar. Like some of the frames in the animation are almost identical to uh, images in the comic books. So like I said, so there is a precedent for stuff like that being true to its original IP. So I think with Rings of Power, it has a lot more to do with the people involved with creating the show than it does more so with that. Because, being a subscription, and I guess Rings of Power being more of a flagship show on Amazon, I guess that's why that they would want to focus more on that side of it, more so of the making money off of it. But as a whole, let's say if you subscribe to Amazon Prime, you can watch any of this stuff on Prime. And so, they're looking more for this individual subscription more so than making money off of an individual project.
Yeah, but I mean, they did spend a lot of money to get the rights for Lord of the Rings. So this
the
is
budget on the show too was
yeah.
horrible.
So this was kind of a like not necessarily make or break because I know Amazon, makes a lot of money in a lot of different ways, but like this was a huge thing that they did, and if it was a complete flop, they would be hurting pretty bad. So I feel like it really is, and I'm not saying anything like that there is an aspect that you don't want to just enrage the fans to where no one wants to watch any of it. But I mean, I wonder how many people they got to subscribe to Amazon Prime because Rings of Power was coming, and then they got maybe the show was okay, but then they found something else that they liked, forgot that they had a subscription, all these different things where they're still raking in a lot of money despite the show not really being that great. Well, then you come around to season 2, they're going to really publicize that. People are going to be like, well, season 1, maybe I liked it, maybe I didn't. Let's see how season 2, like what you're saying is let's see what they fix in season 2. You're going to go back to see how the story unfolds. Sarah's probably going to do the same. We're going to probably watch it as well to see how the story unfolds. It wasn't, season 1 was okay. Let's see how season 2 does it. They're still bringing in that traffic again, despite the fact that it may or may not be good, because there's a curiosity to it. There's, people who might have gotten on because of that and now have it for other reasons. It brings people to Amazon Prime, whether it's good or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I kind of mentioned, like it being like a more of a flagship show. Like it's kind of like Jack Ryan or The Boys, where it's like something they really heavily advertise. But yeah, now that was kind of a rather long tangent there. But let's dive back into the actual Lord of the Rings movies, or the movies and the books. I feel like we might talk about both. What was it? Yeah, I'm kind of more interested to hear Sarah's opinion on this. But was there anything? Is there anything in the Lord of the Rings movies that you don't like because it's different from the way they did the book? I can think of at least one thing off the top of my head. I think I can probably think of some others, but
Off the top of my head, I mentioned this earlier. In the Battle of Pelennor Fields, when the Witch King of Angmar is facing up against Gandalf, and it looks like Gandalf is going to lose. If you look at what Gandalf is, and you look at what the Witch King of Angmar is, that's not going to happen. I feel like, sure, it might have been a really good battle, and it might have even been close, but there's no way that the Witch King of Angmar is going to, like, easily beat Gandalf.
And to that point too, even looking at the like, you can't even use the argument that the Witch King's ring, gave him more power because Gandalf also had a ring of power.
A ring of power, yeah.
Like okay, let's say if and to this I don't know because there's not really like a like in Marvel, all of their characters are ranked on a power scale of 0 to 7. There's not that for Lord of the Rings. But still,
no, there's not.
I feel like it would have been more evenly matched if you had let's say a Maiar and the Witch King with his ring. Maiar with nothing and the Witch King with his ring. I feel like it would have been more evenly powered. But you also have to understand too, So when was Gandalf the Grey,
Yes,
the Valar
I was gonna go with this.
had restricted his power. When they sent him back and he became Gandalf the White, he had full access to his power as a Maya. So
Yeah,
yeah, there really should have been no competition there.
which this is one question that I always ask people when I find out that they like Lord of the Rings. I'm sure I've asked you this before. I don't remember what you said, but I always like to ask people who they think is the most powerful character in the story of Lord of the Rings.
It
Obviously, like excluding Eru or any of the Valar.
okay if you're talking about just characters in Lord of the Rings, it
Yeah,
changes.
yes,
So
but
there's a bunch of different. So obviously, I think once Gandalf came back as Gandalf the White, he was
yeah, agreed.
because so he broke Saruman. Well, this is the book, but he broke Saruman's staff, cast him out of Isengard, or no, he didn't cast him out of Isengard. He left him up to the or gave him over to the Ents. But still, he broke Saruman's staff and essentially left him powerless
With his word.
just with his words. Yeah, and
Yeah,
obviously we don't see a face off between Gandalf and Sauron at this time, or actually ever.
I will say
But
that is. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but that is such a good scene in the books. They're
mm,
like Saruman's speaking and like it's starting to take everyone over, and the instant Gandalf starts talking, it's like, oh, we see who's in charge here.
mm-hmm. But even you see it with the with the Palantir, like you know, Sauron influenced even Saruman through the Palantir, but Gandalf had it in his possession for a while throughout the story, and never
Yeah,
once was Sauron able to obviously Gandalf wasn't using it to the degree Saruman was, but
yeah.
you know Sauron still would have been able to have some form of influence over Gandalf, but you never see him getting swayed or anything throughout the book. And now, uh, if you want to talk about before Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White, I feel like you could argue for Galadriel or Sauron. I feel like you
I would say
could.
it's Sauron at that point. Galadriel, I think, is a close second. But I think overall Sauron is still more
Mm,
powerful.
yeah, and another thing too that a lot of people that is kind of a misconception from the movies, and I understand why they did it this way, but is that Sauron didn't have physical form during Lord of the Rings, which if you actually read the book, he doesn't like it never he's never like appeared in character in the book, but Gollum mentions Sauron torturing him personally because he
Yeah.
mentions he
And how
mentioned
he's still missing a hand. Or not a hand,
yeah
a finger.
he mentions the black hand that's missing a finger.
Yeah.
So yeah, Sauron in the book, Sauron does have physical form, which
Which is I think it's interesting that he like obviously when the ring is cut off the first time and he like dies, sort of, when he like reforms, he still is missing that finger.
well okay so the there's a lot of interesting things with the Maya that go to Middle Earth because obviously the Maya are like supernatural or spiritual beings. Like they don't naturally have a physical form. They can take physical form, but they don't naturally have one.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing with that is you see several times with Sauron, like certain things that happen to his physical form affect the form he can take. Because like when he
Mm-hmm.
is in his fair form of Anatar, in the Second Age when he gets captured and taken to Numenor, and of course this is when Numenor gets destroyed and all this. Sauron is there when Numenor gets destroyed, and his body is destroyed. And
Yeah.
later on, he cannot take that form again because that I don't know if there necessarily is like a explanation for all this, but it's almost like you know you're even though they're spiritual beings and they can take different forms, it's almost like their physical form can still take permanent damage.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where the thing with the ring, him still missing a finger is interesting. But now
And
one
I don't necessarily think that him being portrayed as the eye in the movies is bad, and it's never like explicitly said that he's only the eye. But I mean, like I don't think it really takes anything away
mhm.
from the story.
And well, I
Because, like
feel
you said, even in the books, he never appears in person.
and I feel like in the book, the eye is more of a metaphor of just him being watchful over Mordor.
Yeah.
I want to say it mentions one of the times when they're in when one of them is interacting with the Palantir. It mentions a fiery eye. And I think that's where they got the adaptation for the
But
movie.
that's the Palantir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, when it mentions the Eye of Sauron, well, for one thing, that's the symbol that his armies bear, is the fiery eye.
Yeah.
But it's also, like I said, I think it's also more of a metaphor for just his vigilance over his lands. I don't know necessarily if in the books if there was literally a physical fiery eye over Barad-dûr, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, Now, one thing I did want to mention too, because like I said, I asked you earlier. That's kind of what started this conversation was talking about if there's anything in the movies that you didn't like the way they uh, did it because they may have changed something or something. The biggest thing with the movies, my biggest problem with the movies, and you know, ultimately this really isn't that big of a problem, but the biggest problem I have with the way they adapted the book to the movie is the way they changed the character of Faramir.
Oh, yeah, that is a big one because I love Book Faramir.
Because in the book, so in the movie, Faramir was going to like when he first found the hobbits, he was going to take them back to Gondor because he wanted to use the ring for the war effort for Gondor. But in the books, obviously, Faramir never was tempted by the ring. Faramir
Yeah.
understood that that's what killed his brother.
Yes.
And so, I feel like that's. Well, and kind of on a side note, talking about Boromir, one thing I like is. I forget what it is, because I haven't really paid that much attention to it, but I heard one thing is like. In. It's a piece of Boromir's armor, but I forget exactly what it is because I haven't really paid that much attention to it. I've just heard about this, but in the Fellowship, Boromir has a piece of armor, but throughout the rest of the movies, Aragorn is wearing this. It's a pauldron or
It's his
something.
greaves
Oh, it's Greaves.
on
Yeah.
his forearms. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I like that because, obviously, Boromir admits to Aragorn what he did, and ultimately repents of what he did, pretty much. And so I like that because Aragorn wears it to, I guess keep Boromir through the I just like that symbolism.
If you don't mind, I want to talk about Boromir for a second because I feel like he gets thrown under the rug too much. Because, like, everybody gives him a lot of grief for falling to the temptation of the ring. And, like, yeah, it's not good, but a lot of people would have done the same thing. Like, when you're
Mm.
comparing them to Aragorn and Faramir, you're like, okay, but those are the exception, not the rule.
Well, and
Like,
it's like
their willpower is insane.
Aragorn, Gandalf, and Galadriel all tell Frodo, no, I'm not taking that,
Yeah,
because
I was just saying for
they
men,
all
but
know
yeah,
what will happen if they take the ring. And
yeah,
I think so Boromir. I feel like Boromir has a lot more like symbolism to a little bit to Isildur, like not necessarily
yes,
understanding what it was, what it meant, how it corrupted, and ultimately, whereas Isildur died still, clinging to his lust for the ring.
I know where you're going.
Boromir ultimately repented. And so I feel like
Yeah,
and
and the symbolism of that is really shown in, especially in the movies, when Isildur is killed, he is shot like with by three
mm,
arrows in the back, and when Boromir is killed, he's shot by three arrows in the front because he like turned and is facing it rather than hiding from it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and that
Now let's talk
symbolism.
about this. Let's talk about this though. David, however, is not pure of heart because what does he have around his neck right now?
Oh.
The one ring. He did not resist the temptation. He has his precious. He is starting to look like Gollum.
Well, he's always looked like that.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. He's gonna start getting a hunchback soon.
He already has one.
He's gonna have big hairy feet soon.
You
All
need
right.
me to say it again?
He's gonna go bald and start
Okay, he's
coughing up.
not bald
He's
yet.
gonna start coughing up hairballs because he's gonna be like,
I think he already does that.
precious.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, David, continue what you were saying.
Yeah, like, and there are also symbolisms of Isildur to Aragorn as well, because obviously Aragorn's the direct descendant of Isildur, but I do like the Isildur and Boromir symbolism too, just because that you know it's still both of them that
Yeah.
are the ones that fell to the can I talk? Are the ones that fell to the temptation of the ring.
No.
Yeah.
Another thing, and I don't necessarily dislike this, but that is different between the books and the movies, is that in the books, Aragorn is always accepting that he's going to Gondor to become king.
Mm.
Like from the first, like when they're leaving Rivendell in Fellowship, Aragorn is talking about how he and Boromir are going to split off from the rest of the Fellowship and go to Gondor. Whereas in the movies, it's like it's not until I think it's the I want to say it's the Two Towers. It might be in Return of the King. They blur together because I always watch them together. But it's when they're on the way to Gondor, um, for the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and he splits off to go get the Army of the Dead. And
And
they're stopped, and they're in the tents, and Elrond shows up with the sword. And it's not really until then that he really accepts it.
to that point too, because in the books, Narcio is reforged when they're in Rivendell, and so
Yeah,
Aragorn has Anduril from that point onward in the books. But yeah,
yeah,
it's not till that point, before they go into the Paths of the Dead, that Aragorn receives Anduril.
yeah. You have anything to add?
No, I'm just honestly enjoying hearing y'all talk about all this.
One
Um,
thing I really love about Lord of the Rings, and this goes back to Faramir and Aragorn, and Samwise is also a very good uh example of this. Is the men are strong and brave and violent, killing people, but they're also tender and loving and like that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. Like Aragorn, the reason that they like accept him as king sort of at towards the end is like or like that they know it's him is because he's a healer. And it's like I could go on about this for a long time, but I think Lord of the Rings portrays positive masculinity better than any other story. Like the men, like I said, like I was saying, the men are strong and they're brave and they're, you know, violent, but they're also tender, caring, healing, and like another thing is they're not afraid to show affection to one another, which I think is healthy. Like the men are hugging and crying, and like Boromir dies and Aragorn gives him a kiss on the forehead, and it's not like weird. It's like, yeah, of course he does because they all love each other, and like it's not weird. It's amazing.
I think also, if you talking about the violent side of things, like there is that bond because of what they've been through. You know, like
Yeah.
people who are in the military, and I have no experience with this, none of us do. But people who are in the military and fighting wars, they create a special bond that you can't really get anywhere else. And I think that's probably very similar. That'd be the similar thing with this is like, you know, you see your brothers dying, you know, essentially. Like it is extremely sad, and it is extremely like, you know, you need to show your love because you don't know, you know, you might go into a battle and someone might not come out. You got to, you know, express that because it's important.
I think some of the best examples of that, as far as the movies go, is well, this is books and movies. The other one's more just in the movies. But the bond between Sam and Frodo is unmatchable. Like, it's amazing the way
Mm.
that they are together. And especially, like, when it all comes down to the wire and, you know, Frodo is collapsed at the base of Mount Doom because he can't go any farther. And Sam is like, well, you know, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and carries him up the mountain. And, like, and also the brokenness that Sam feels seeing Frodo lose himself to the ring is heartbreaking.
Acting was on par.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second one um is this is just like a little scene in Return of the King. But like one of the moments where they're the Battle of the Black Gate, and it's when Aragorn is fighting the troll and it like stomps on him. And Legolas, usually when you see Legolas in battle, he looks like he's like taking a Sunday stroll. Like he's just having the time of his life. But like that moment where the troll is like standing on Aragorn and it's about to kill him, Legolas is like panicking, like he's fighting to get through the crowd to try to come save him. And again, that acting is just amazing.
Mm. Mm. And like to that point, like kind of adding on to what you're talking about here, like that's one thing that so nowadays there's a lot of and I don't want to get into too much into this because it really shouldn't be, but it does start to get into some of the political stuff with this. I don't want to get too much into this, but there's a lot of people, especially online, talking about like basically being a man. You know, you've got like
Yeah.
you've got like all the Andrew Tates and all the like that, all that. But like I like what I don't know if y'all know who this is or anything, and I don't really like I said this is might get a little bit too political for what we do, but I like how Nick Freitas sums it up. Basically, yes, you need to be tender and caring and all this stuff, but a man also needs to be dangerous. How do you expect to
Yeah.
protect your family, your loved ones, if you're not dangerous? And
in the words of Faramir, I love the sword not for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness. I love that only which they defend. I was
mm-hmm.
like, oh,
Yeah,
that's good.
exactly, exactly. And now going back to talking about Aragorn, one thing I do want to talk about too with is his lineage. So I've had to explain this before because it is kind of confusing about okay, so why are there no kings in Gondor? What happened to all this stuff? What? So essentially, Aragorn is a okay. So going back to the founding of Gondor. So there were two kingdoms. There were Gondor and Arnor. And Isildur was the king. Well, okay. So Elendil, who is Isildur's father, was the first High King of Arnor. And so the High King of Arnor ruled over Arnor and Gondor. But Isildur was also the king of Gondor. So he was kind of like a step. It's kind of like how the Roman Empire, there was East and West, but the Western Roman Emperor had a little bit more power and was technically over both.
Yeah.
But there was two emperors. It's kind of the same way. That's kind of the same way that works. So after Elendil dies in the battle, when Isildur gets the ring, Isildur becomes the High King of Arnor, and his brother becomes the King of Gondor. Isildur dies, and his son takes the throne of Arnor, but he's not the High King anymore. It's just the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor now. They're not really the same thing anymore. They're kind of more separate kingdoms now. So Aragorn is a direct descendant of Isildur through Isildur's line. So he comes from the kings of Arnor. But before the kings of Gondor die out, because that's what happens to them. They kind of die off without a known heir. There is a branch that marries into the royal family of Arnor, and this is way further down the line. So they're like
Incest.
they're like 10th cousins at this point. So it's not really. But look at the royal families of Europe. It's not really that uncommon. But
they're much better than that.
We don't want to look at the royal families of Europe. They're not that
the family
much
tree
that
that looks more like a Christmas wreath.
Yeah, but it's but they're like 10th cousins at this point. So the Marion. So then the kings of Gondor die off with no heir. The royal family dies off with no living heir. So Gondor becomes a kingdom without a royal family. Then the kingdom of Arnor falls, but the royal family is still intact. So the royal family of Arnor becomes a royal family with no kingdom. And Aragorn is descended of that line, and since there was a connection closer than the connection back to Isildur, that's what gives him the right to rule over Gondor. And he actually becomes the High King of Gondor, which he rules over the former kingdom of Arnor and Gondor. So because he is a descendant of both lines. So
you explained that pretty well.
Yeah,
I think so.
So that if anyone listening to this was ever confused, but if anyone listening to this was ever confused by that, I hope that summed that up a little bit better, because I had to do some digging into that to actually understand fully what was going on with all that.
Yeah, because without looking into that, it's kind of weird that it's like, oh, Gondor doesn't have a king, but the line still exists. It's like, did they just leave?
Yeah, that was a question I had for you when we were watching through it a while back. I asked you about that, and you kind of broke that down for me.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really make much sense from the realm of the movie as far as what they're explaining. It was just like, okay, he's the rightful heir. There's no one else.
Yeah.
Isildur was the last, king. Yada yada yada.
And that's nothing too. Like my brother Robert actually asked me, so if Isildur had a son, why didn't he become king? It's because he did, but he was king of Arnor, and Isildur's brother was king of Gondor. Isildur was not the last king. The movie doesn't really explain that.
Yeah. Which is why it gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
And like you said, you had to do some digging for it, so it's kind of fair, but not prominent in some of the mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so...
Should we talk about Gollum?
Yeah, we can talk about Gollum. What exactly did you want to talk about with Gollum?
Well, we wanted to talk about how we think you're turning into him, and we'd like to stop you. This is an intervention. Give us the ring, David.
Um, well, I think that Gollum. How do I want to put this exactly? Gollum is sort of
It's
the
so sexy. I mean,
humanity side portrayed that every character who's come in contact with the ring went through. Like, and you see this with in the movies with Bilbo when he sees the ring on Frodo and he
Mm-hmm.
wants it back, and he kind of like looks like Gollum for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but just the fall that he went through, and even though it's a little bit horrifying to watch, the opening scene in the extended edition of I think it's just in
it's in the movie.
it's in both, okay, in Return of the King where Got Smeagol is turning into Gollum.
I think that does a really good job of showing the power the ring has over. Because think about this: when you're watching that scene, you know, Smeagol and what's his friend's name or whatever?
Deagle.
Meagle?
Deagle.
Smeagol and Meagle. Seagull and the other guy. Anyways,
Smeagol.
they're there. They're two friends that are fishing, right? They're out on a fishing,
Yeah, just for
date.
fun.
It's just for
For
fun,
birthday.
right? For who's
Well, it's Smeagol's
Smeagol's
birthday.
birthday. So they're just out there having fun. Then the ring is found, and what happens? They go to kill each other for it. Two friends
Immediately.
who have been friends for who knows how long, maybe their whole lives, are out to kill each other for this ring they just found.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like me trying to kill David for the ring around his neck, which I'll probably use the thing he has to strangle him. You won't expect it. It really shows just how much power the ring has over it. And that even more so shows just how strong of a character Frodo is for how long he is able to resist the temptation, and go about his mission.
Which hobbits as a species have a higher resistance for it.
Well, and to a point, Bilbo
well, he technically
too.
wasn't a hobbit; he was like a hobbit.
So okay. So with Smeagol, you're talking about that. So Smeagol was a stewer. So there were.
He wasn't the same.
Stewers were kind of like a predecessor to hobbits. So another thing the movie doesn't really explain well, and actually neither does the Lord of the Rings book, is where did hobbits come from? What are they? We have origin stories. We have origin stories for elves, men, and dwarves, but not hobbits. Hobbits.
They just showed up.
Hobbits are men. They're just short.
Little.
So basically, it's like an entire subset of humans with dwarfism. Is basically where the hobbits came from. And the Stewers, the Harfoots, and what's the third one?
I'll look it up.
I don't remember the name of the third family group. But basically, all of those three family groups settled in the modern-day Shire, and they became hobbits. Smeagol was from, the Stewers, which at that point they were kind of like... Yes, Fallowhides. Yeah. And so, Smeagol was a stewer, and at that point, when they settled, or, it was before they settled in the Shire, they weren't hobbits yet. So, they still had kind of the ambitions of men, and that's why the ring corrupted them instantly.
Okay.
Hobbits...
Fair enough.
Hobbits don't have, at the end of the day...
They don't have an adventurous bone in their body.
Exactly. At the end of the day, all hobbits want to do is sit around, drink beer, and smoke.
And eat.
That sounds pretty good. Can I just be a hobbit?
Or
I know
ale,
I'm too tall, but can I just
yeah.
that? I want to be a hobbit.
But like I said, at the end of the day, all hobbits want to do is eat, drink ale, and smoke. That's really what that's what they what they like doing. That's what they want to do, and that's why Bilbo had no idea of all the politics going on in the world and what the ring actually was, and he didn't know all the power that it held and all this stuff.
Shiny.
Exactly. He was just like, oh, it's a ring, and it comes in handy. I'll keep it. Like he had no idea with all this
Yeah.
stuff going on. He didn't care about all the power struggles going on in Middle Earth, and that's why it took 60 years to get him to the point where he was feeling like you know too little butter stretched over too much bread.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And sorry, go ahead.
and why Frodo gets corrupted so much faster. Obviously, in the book, he had it for 20 years longer than he did in the movies. But why he gets corrupted so much faster, even though he didn't even use it near to the degree that Bilbo did, is because as he got so close to Mordor, the ring's corruptive power got worse because Sauron was growing in power, and as the ring got closer to Sauron, it wanted to get back to him, and so that's why its power got so much stronger. And that's why Frodo got corrupted so much faster.
And the movies portray that very well with like it being on the chain, and you can see it's like digging into his skin with
Mm-hmm.
like the weight of it. I think that's just a really good touch.
Mm-hmm. And like whenever the ring wraiths are near, like it gets like heavy, and like he the urge to put it on, it yeah, they did a good job with portraying that in the movie as well.
Mm.
Um, Now going back to talking about Gollum, this is more of a movie thing more so than um actual lore thing. But again, the CGI still stands out. So like okay, yes, to a point. I think there has been better CGI done, but for a movie made in well,
A movie as old
it
as
was
I am.
released. It was released in 02, let's see what Two
Well,
Towers was
Two
02.
Towers was 02.
Return of the King was
Return of the
oh
King was
03.
03.
So a movie made in like the
He's a
night.
Two Towers baby. I'm a Return of the King baby.
So a movie made in like production began in the 90s, and probably ended in 2000. A lot of the CGI in those later two movies were probably done in 01 or 02. But still, for CGI
Let's
from 2000, that's it's still insane to me that it holds up that well.
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
let's also talk about the dedication that Andy Serkis had to
Andy
the
Serkis is
character
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
of Gollum. Like with how much he had to put into the character.
Also, the acting that comes through
Mhm.
straight from Andy Serkis. Like you can look at Andy Serkis when he does his Gollum voice, and you can see the same faces that
Yeah.
Gollum makes.
Which
Mm-hmm.
that's really also a tell of not just his dedication as an actor, but also the dedication to the people who are doing the CGI, like that they just took his facial expressions and really put them into
Well,
the face of Gollum.
I think that was the I think that was one of the first times they used mocap. I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the
Yeah.
first times they used mocap. So that was like
Yeah.
a brand new
Well,
technology.
Jar Jar Binks was mocap, and that at least came out earlier
That
in
okay, that was
'99.
99,
So
yeah. But okay, perfect example. Well, Jar Jar Binks isn't bad, but like okay, you look at Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith was better, but Attack of the Clones especially because that was the same time. Compare the CGI in
mhm,
Attack of the Clones to the CGI in Lord of the Rings. Again, they didn't use it to near the
mhm,
extent in Lord of the Rings that they did in Attack of the Clones,
yeah.
but still, the CGI is so much better in Lord of the Rings compared to Attack of the Clones.
Mhm. I think that also shows the attention to detail that the
Mm.
the cast and crew, specifically the crew, when it comes to CGI, had for Lord of the Rings. Like the attention to detail that they had. Like, yeah, there was a lot of attention to detail, I'm sure, that was placed, from George's perspective on, Attack of the Clones, but nowhere near to how much it was when it came
Mm.
to the production of Lord of the Rings.
Now,
While we're talking about cast and crew, I just want to go ahead and put this out there. Viggo Mortensen would hike to their filming location every day to get that authentic sweaty look. And he also was one of the best sword fighters that their trainer had ever seen or had ever trained. And he had never done any sword fighting prior to the movies.
Oh, one thing I want to mention too. So,
He
did
was
you
also 80 years old during the production.
know Viggo Mortensen got, well, I don't know if he actually got arrested, but he got the cops called on him during the filming of the movies because he was in
I did not.
I forget which city it is in New Zealand, but the city they were staying in New Zealand, he had gone to the gym to train. He was training with a prop sword. And so he was walking back to where he was staying, and he was like evening, might have been already dark, but he was just kind of swinging around the prop sword, just practicing moves and stuff as he was walking, and he got the cops called on him because he's walking down the street
There's
with a
some
sword.
lunatic swinging a sword.
Yeah.
That's great.
But yeah.
I love Viggo Mortensen, if it's not clear already.
But now
Aragorn.
one thing I want to talk about too with the talking about CGI. Now, I do want to mention the Balrog also had amazing CGI, but that's not the main thing I want to talk about with the Balrog, because they left it kind of ambiguous in the movie. Because like he's kind of shrouded in smoke, which does fit the description of the book, but you know where I'm going with this, Sarah. I can tell by the look on your face.
I do.
So,
I'm
Sarah,
curious what you think.
wings or no wings?
Okay. I think that the Balrogs do not have wings. But I think they look really freaking cool with wings.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing.
I also personally, I think that they look more like humans than like ram horn dragon-y looking things.
And well, that's the thing. The way the Fellowship of the Ring describes the Balrog. So okay, so it originally with the wing thing, it originally says he was cloaked in shadow like two vast wings, which is a simile, which is basically a metaphor, but it uses the word like.
Yeah.
And then later on in the chapter, just a couple paragraphs down, it mentions the Balrog's wings, but it's just repeating the same metaphor from earlier.
Yeah.
So that's
if you look at the Silmarillion, which has a lot more to go on for Balrogs than Lord of the Rings does, because Lord of the Rings only has one, and Silmarillion has a bunch of them. It's never really mentioned that they do or don't have wings, but there are a lot of circumstances where if they did have wings, why didn't they use them? Because that would have been a very good tactical advantage.
And another argument I hear for four wings is in the Silmarillion it talks about Balrogs flying, but Tolkien used that word a lot to mean traveling or running or moving very quickly.
Yeah.
Fly, you fools.
Yeah.
Exactly. Gandalf didn't literally mean fly. He meant,
The best case you could make for wings would be like vestigial wings that don't actually help them fly. Because that's another thing. If the Balrog has wings and Gandalf knocks it into a hole, why didn't it just fly out?
See you later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, God.
What do you think? Wings or no wings? Boneless or traditional?
I like boneless.
Because you have no spine.
Get your Buffalo Balrog wings here.
The hottest flavor they have.
They can't handle the heat.
But yeah,
I don't know what made me think of this, but another thing, going back to Faramir, that I really like about the books is that it goes more into Faramir and Eowyn's relationship. Even then doesn't go into it a whole lot, but it doesn't go into it at all in the movie. So
well, yeah, because if you watch the movie,
and then that's it.
If you watch the movies, they're basically only together in the end scene
yeah,
when Aragorn is being crowned.
and watching the movie, you're just kind of like, hold up, where did this come from?
Yeah, they're like, oh, I guess they liked each other.
Yeah, yeah, you do get them,
And I mean, they really only have like one chapter in the books, but I think it's a really sweet chapter.
and that's one thing I will say. So obviously, they cut a lot of characters out of Lord of the Rings when they made the movies because there are a ton of characters in the books.
Glorfindel.
I was about to bring up Glorfindel. So in when the Black Riders are chasing the well, it's just the hobbits and Aragorn at this point. After Weathertop, when Frodo is like semi conscious because he was just stabbed, and then in the movie, Arwen rides up and saves Frodo, takes him back to Rivendell. In the books, it was Glorfindel, which Glorfindel is a like very cool character in the books because like he's like the
He's incredibly powerful.
incredibly powerful, yeah, and he had a very
Yeah.
similar story to Gandalf of he died fighting a Balrog and was sent back. Well,
Yeah.
he actually died fighting Gothmog, who was the
King of Balrogs.
yeah, the king
Or
of the
the
Balrogs,
Head Poncho.
not the Gothmog from the Battle of Pelennor Fields, because the orc
The
general in the
stinky Gothmog.
yeah, the orc general in the Battle of Pelennor Fields was also Gothmog, but it was a different Gothmog, Gothmog the Balrog.
He was just compensating for his weak little noodle arm.
Yeah, but yeah. So they changed it, but I understand why, because I understand they wanted to give Arwen more screen time because Arwen and uh, Aragorn's romance is not a focal point in the book. It's there, it's subtle,
Yeah.
but it's not a focal point. And I understand, so that's why they wanted to have her as more of a character and to kind of flesh that out a little more, kind of show that to the audience more. So I
Also, I love. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to say I understand why they did that.
Yeah. I love that, like, there's a hint of a love triangle, maybe, with Eowyn, but I love the fact that it's never, like, an option for Aragorn. Like, he knows he loves Arwen.
Mm.
Eowyn likes him, and he's like, for one thing, he's like, you're too young for me, because you're, like, actually 20, and I'm actually, like, 87 over here. I'm older than your dad, literally.
I think that's a nice touch though that they did with that. I think you were talking earlier about like masculinity or whatever, like how they portray men in this. Like he's not a player in
No.
this. He's dedicated to one woman.
One woman who, at that point, he doesn't even think he can have.
Yeah.
Because he thinks she's going to the
Valinor.
to Valinor. Yeah.
It's like, there's this other girl who's flirting with him, kind of, there's a little bit of that, like at least in the movie. And, is that, and then he's just completely like, no, I'm not even gonna play with these things. Like this is just no. Because
and it's not even like disrespectful to Eowyn either.
Yeah.
Like you can tell that he loves her, he cherishes her, and wants what's best for her, and he knows that's not him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was really good. So, David, I feel like this is, again, like you said, very barely scratching the surface, but how long have we been recording?
2 hours.
We did have some technical
I
difficulties.
figured it'd be around 2 hours.
Do you want to do your trivia and then we'll...
No, I actually don't want to do the trivia. We're around 2 hours. It's getting late. I'm ready to be done.
Yeah, it's 8:30.
I could
It's
talk
almost
about Lord of the Rings all day.
yeah, it's almost
I will say
8:30 right
this.
now. So
We will do trivia for this at a later date. I do think that we do need to go ahead and fit Lord of the Rings into our schedule, and to maybe extend it a little bit longer, we might want to do the Hobbits as well, just so we have and we can do it similar. But We can do trivia at a later date. I think this y'all dove into this pretty well for scratching the surface. Um, but I feel like that's enough for one podcast. I think we can do others later on pertaining to the same subjects.
Yeah. I feel like we should probably, if we do Lord of the Rings, we should probably do the Hobbit movies too. And those, I don't know, are probably going to be different to our Star Wars ones just because we'll have the books to reference to as well. I do want more so talk about the movies just because that's generally what we talk about, but we'll have the books to reference there as well. Because even though there are novelizations for the Star Wars movies, I have not read any of them. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, it's a little different than just obviously.
Real quick, if anybody wants to get more into the Silmarillion and you don't want to sit down to read a history textbook, shout out to the Prancing Pony podcast.
Yes,
they're amazing. They do a read through of all of Lord of the Rings ever, and I love it. And I love them, and you should listen to it because they're great.
One thing I do want to throw out here real quick. I like how Sarah and I independently have discovered all of these resources. Like we mentioned Nerd of the Rings, we mentioned Hello Future Me, we mentioned or she mentioned the Prancing Pony podcast, which I actually have not listened to.
That's what I'm Tolkien about is also good.
I haven't listened to him, but I haven't listened to much of the Prancing Pony podcast. But from what I have listened to, they are very good, very excellent, in depth on what they talk about.
Yeah. Well, because they basically take it a couple pages at a time.
Is
sometimes.
That the one that you were telling me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought so.
And
they, from what little I've listened to, they have a nice dynamic. They have really good chemistry together.
They go in depth without being boring. It's a really good dynamic.
Yeah. And like I said, if you do want to learn more about Lord of the Rings 2, I highly recommend Nerd of the Rings. He does excellent video essays on. He breaks down characters. It's really handy because he
also goes into a lot more theories and stuff, which is fun.
Yeah, but it's also really handy too because a lot of times the story of a single character might be spread across 5 different books, and he'll bring it all into one video, which I do appreciate. And like I said, if you want to get more philosophical, more technical on a lot of the writing stuff, world building side of it, check out Hello Future Me. He does a lot of excellent video essays on that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just handing out free.
While you're checking out stuff on YouTube, make sure to check out our channel too.
I was about to say
not important.
I was about to say we're just handing out a bunch of free publicity. Maybe not. I don't know. No one's gonna listen this far to this podcast.
Free publicity to our 20 listeners.
Yeah, but yeah, go check them out. Go support them. We love listening to all their stuff. So yeah, and yeah, go check us out on YouTube. We're on Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're listening to this, you probably already know all this, but yeah.
But if you're just by chance finding us, anyways, with that, Sarah, would you like to head us on out to an outro?
If I remember how it goes. Wait, how does it start?
You got to do your best job with it.
Okay. Well, that's all we have for you today, guys. Sadly, we already told them to like and stuff, so I'm not going to tell you to do that again because that would be annoying. What would not be annoying is us ending this right now. So we will see you next time, and thank you for joining us on the Trailcast.